All right, folks, here to jump in again. Once again, to talk about key player trends that you need to know heading into week 7. Hey, Mr. Robinson, do we have a Giants wide receiver on the rise in New York? We got a bunch of trends that we're going to talk about today: running backs, tight ends, wide receivers, guys that you should trade for, trade away, maybe even might be on your waiver wires. Before we jump into the show today, we want to make sure you follow us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. We got posts going up every single day. We also have brand new tools and resources over on Razzball.com. That's right, folks. We have the fantasy data tab that has a bunch of great data for you to help you figure out when to start sit, what players to acquire. We have the slot versus wide defense, weekly defense analysis to let you know which teams allow the most fantasy points in the slot versus out wide. We have rest of season strength of schedules. We also have player usage data. So we have it all that you need to start and sit your players each and every week. But also make sure you're jumping over to Razzball.com to check out all the great articles from all our great writers. We have a bunch of weekly analysis coming out from defense to starts of the week. You name it, we got it. But of course, make sure you check out Razzball.com for all the great resources and tools we have for things like baseball, basketball, hockey, and more. But without further ado, let's start the show. All right, folks, we're here to talk about some key player trends that you need to know, things that I've just kind of picked up for today's show. I've just been doing some research, getting ready for our Sunday live start sit show. That's right. Tomorrow, jump on with us from 7 a.m. on to kickoff PST. We're going to be doing a bunch of stuff tomorrow, talking about the key slot versus wide matchups, weather updates, injury updates on the offensive line, defense, all the stuff you're going to need to know before you make your lineup decision. Of course, we're answering your start sit questions live, so jump on to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. You won't regret it. Every Sunday morning before kickoff, make sure you're with us. We'll have all the things you need to know. But now let's talk about some key player trends for heading into week 7. Some of the things that I've kind of learned by using the tools and resources we have at Razzball. We have a bunch of great resources now with the player usage data, monitoring trends. We also have a bunch of information on these guys' rest of season schedules, which is really key because we're getting close to those trade deadlines. I know we're a couple weeks away, probably closer to week 12. We'll get closer to those trade deadlines, but now is the time to start making adjustments. One of the things before we dive into the individual players is if you're 0-6, 1-5, you're not done yet, but you have to change your philosophy to win now. That's right. So if you're 1-5, 0-6, don't give up yet on the season. However, you need to start making win now moves. Does that mean that also means trading away injured players? That means, if you have a stud that is underperforming, it's start to evaluate their weekly matchups. Start to evaluate playing the best players in the best matchups is key. So if you have a guy like an RB2 that has an elite matchup that week, you might want to start him over a quote-unquote stud that has a tougher matchup. It's time to make changes. You're 0-6 or 1-5 for a reason. Start picking up guys like this week, Matt Ryan, Jimmy G, elite matchups. Both love those guys. I have Tom Brady in a bunch of leagues. I'm starting Jimmy G and Matt Ryan over him because I feel like there's more upside in those matchups for those guys. But things like that are key. So make sure you're jumping on the Sunday Live show. We'll talk a lot about that more tomorrow. But I want to jump into my first player trend today. It is actually the Kansas City Chiefs backfield. Now, a lot of things that we're talking about, you're going to hear a three-way committee. And Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco are involved. But something I want to talk about first is that CEH saw a season-high 64% of the rush share last week. Now, yes, Isaiah Pacheco and McKinnon are involved, but that only involved 9 carries for CEH. But why is this important? I think the problem is CEH, because of the way Patrick Mahomes in this offense operates, if he doesn't get into the end zone and he gets that 9-carry week, he's going to have lower floors because he's not the typical 100, the 20-plus touch guy. He didn't get any receptions this week. And I think a lot of us might start panicking and selling CEH for basically pennies on the dollar after a down week. Remember, he's on the Kansas City Chiefs offense, and the guy got a 64% rush share last week. So I'm not saying you have to sell CEH, and I do agree. His numbers are inflated. But the problem is he's probably the biggest sell in the industry right now. Everybody wants to sell CEH. The problem is everybody knows that. So you're not going to get worth for this guy. So I'm just trying to offer some type of silver lining for CEH owners. If you are one, 64% of the team rush share is his highest of the year. So that is key. And I think that this week playing a very banged up San Francisco defense, a 61.86 score. So if you don't know what SIC score is, it's SIC score. Go check them out, sicscore.com. Fantastic resource. That just allowed 110 rushing yards to the backup running backs Algier and Huntley in Atlanta. So I think that CEH has a solid day this week. And I think he could build off that bigger rush share that he just had. Let's jump down to the next update is Travis Etienne versus James Robinson. Okay, so first thing you're going to notice is that Travis Etienne's going up. James Robinson is going down. Might be overblown just a little bit. They're actually, there was closer to a 50-50 timeshare on the ground last week, which is true. I think it was 12-10 in carries last week's game. But really, when it comes to team rush shares, not too much of a difference. James Robinson did see a 12% dip in his team rush share. So I do think that it is correct to think the time to start buying Travis Etienne is probably now. He did not see an increase, though, in the team total rush share. He did have 10 carries, but really it's kind of on par with the season. So I think a lot of people are thinking that James Robinson is ceding more work to Travis Etienne specifically. Instead, Hasty got involved in the game last week. They also had a couple wide receivers run the ball with Agnew and Kirk. So there was more involvement to get the running game jump-started through other players. Etienne didn't necessarily see a much bigger role in the ground game. So I think that's key. I will admit that Travis Etienne is on the rise and Robinson is taking a backseat. 12% dip is worth noting. However, there was not much of a change in the routes run the dropbacks. Neither of these guys saw, Travis Etienne didn't start running a boatload more routes to the team total dropbacks. So as much as I want to say that Travis Etienne is on the rise and James Robinson's down ticking, I think it is a little bit, I think it is true. But I think that before we start trying to buy Travis Etienne in bulk and trying to get him on many teams, I'm just saying that from what I saw in the numbers, his underlying usage did not change that much last week. So I do think that you are starting to see a little bit of a change in the guard, but James Robinson is not going anywhere long-term. The matchups for week 7, let's talk quickly about the matchup versus the Giants. It leans Etienne, though. Look at the types of running backs that have done really well against the New York Giants over the last few weeks. CMC, Aaron Jones, Khalil Herbert, Kenyan Drake, Tony Pollard. Those type of speed backs. Tony Pollard and Aaron Jones are a great example of their backfields. But you have Zeke and A.J. Dillon, and James Robinson fits that mold of A.J. Dillon and Zeke versus Etienne fits as the Aaron Jones and also the Tony Pollard type fit in that scheme. So those guys had better days than their counterparts. So I do think that this week we lean Travis Etienne over James Robinson. Let's jump down to the next one. It's the Dolphins backfield split. So we're starting to see really a lot. Now, this is one where we've kind of noticed over the last 2 weeks. Mostert had one signature game so far this year. It was 2 weeks ago. Last week, not too great. 3 weeks ago, but this is the key, the rush shares, okay? 68% of the team rush share 3 weeks ago, 72% 2 weeks ago, 78% of the carries overall went to Raheem Mostert last week. Now, the numbers don't jump out at you, but he also ran more routes again than Chase Edmonds. He's being treated as the foundational runner in this offense. This week's matchup is extremely tough for Mostert. He's probably one of the bottom 5 matchups on the week against the Pittsburgh Steelers run defense. He is a flex, but his matchups get super soft over the next few weeks. This is why Mostert might be a buy. You might even want to wait. You could probably wait one more week. He might have another, a solid 15 for 60 on the ground, maybe 1 or 2 catches. If he gets in the end zone, it is what it is. But if you want to bet the trend a little bit here, this is the next, after this week, this is who the Dolphins play. Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, and Houston. Things are about to open up for Raheem Mostert. So I think Mostert is one of my favorite buys. Could even wait one more week, maybe, see if he has another pedestrian game against Pittsburgh. And you could probably even get him as a throw-in in a trade that people might not be valuing Mostert. So I do like Mostert, the trend that he is going in. For Chase Edmonds, unfortunately, he's kind of fallen back into a lesser used role that he had up behind James Conner over the stretch last year. So I don't really think Edmonds is really, I honestly think he's probably more valuable to as a handcuff to the Mostert owner than as a standalone player, in my opinion. Let's talk to the next one. J.K. Dobbins, injury impact. So Dobbins is out 4 to 6 weeks. We all know that. Edwards is slowly making his way back. But listen, if you listen to Sports Injury Central, you listen to all the docs about this, it's going to take time for Gus Edwards to get up and running. So what does this mean for J.K. Dobbins? What does this mean for Kenyan Drake? Kenyan Drake is coming off a ridiculous game last week where he got over 100 yards rushing, couple big runs. I think that when you look at his type of floor, look at Devonta Freeman last year, averaged 11.8 PPR points per game over the second half of 2021 as the primary ball carrier for this Baltimore Ravens run offense. The Ravens run offense is a lot better this year than it was last year. And I think that Drake now falls into this rock solid RB2, at least for the next few weeks. This is one of those guys where if you're 1-5, 0-6, and you need to start winning now, he's a win now player. Yes, you might have to trade maybe someone with longer standing value, maybe like a Travis Etienne. This is a really good example. Travis Etienne is probably better rest of season, but maybe over the next 5 weeks, Drake is the better guy. So if you need to turn around your season, you're 2-4, you might want to give up a player that has a tougher short range schedule for a guy like Drake, who I know is probably going to give you RB2 numbers as the lead back for this offense for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 4 weeks to 5 weeks, as Gus Edwards gets eased back in and Dobbins is out for a while. This week he has a pretty solid matchup, against the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns, he's number 4 in my matchup metric according to adjusted line yards. So right there, it's just like, okay, I think that Kenyan Drake, in my opinion, is someone that you should probably go target in your draft, in your leagues. Next one, Naji Harris. So Naji Harris rush share dropped to 52%. That's the lowest of the season. Back-to-back games under 15 carries. He only had 6 games all of last year with under 15 carries. Now, okay, that's about a third of the season. He had under 15 carries. He's already seen that in 3 games this year. The other problem, though, is his receiving work. So last season, he only had 2 games under 10 receiving yards. He's done that 4 times already in 2022. So I just think that, from my opinion, unfortunately for Naji Harris owners, the season is going to get better. By the way, he had a very, very tough early season schedule. It will pick up a little bit, but not enough for him to be a trade target. If you have him on your rosters, he's benchable. Like, Naji Harris is no longer a must-start RB2. He is a guy that will be matchup dependent. When you think he's going to have a good matchup, plug him in there. If he's got a bad matchup, you could fade him for better guys. Like a guy like Drake, you could start over Naji Harris this week, especially with the matchup, because this week they got the Miami Dolphins, which is hands down the worst matchup on the week according to our adjusted line yards metric online. All right, let's jump down to the next one here. We have the Kansas City Chiefs receiving corps. Now, the two bigger takeaways. Number one, Juju Smith-Schuster saw a huge uptick in his yards, routes to dropback. So last week, he led the team in routes, and his routes run to dropback went up into the 90th percentile. So now he's in the 90% range, leading the team in routes, gets 5 targets last week. But the other thing I found interesting about Juju is that he's not a slot receiver anymore. Over 70% of his fantasy points come through the perimeter versus the slot. So we have to start thinking of him differently. He's not a slot receiver anymore. So that's going to be unique for him. That also means that he's not coming in on 3 receiver sets as the slot guy like Mecole Hardman does. He's out there constantly. So Juju, when we start evaluating his matchup metrics through the slot versus Y tool, he's better viewed as a slot guy. So that's important to note. Sky Moore is the other one. Sky Moore saw his routes run to dropback rate increase by 9%. In turn, Mecole Hardman saw his drop by 7%. So we're starting to see more Sky Moore, less of Mecole Hardman. Now, under 10% is nothing to just go out, drop Mecole Hardman for Sky Moore, or necessarily pick up Sky Moore and drop a guy that's more of a flex player this week. I'm not saying you have to go get him yet. But if you have a deeper league, deeper benches, Sky Moore might make sense to plop on the bench and see if this trend continues, because it's clearly starting to happen at the expense of Mecole Hardman. And if Sky Moore can kind of take over that role by mid-year, we could really see some very nice usage in that kind of gadget Tyreek Hill role that they had, in the short screen game playing out of the slot. So I do think that Sky Moore, this is something we'll monitor this week, because this week they get a very banged up 49ers defense. I mean, the 49ers defense is decimated, not only at the passing defense, but running game, everything. So Juju is in for me this week as a wide receiver 2 / flex. Sky Moore is a stash, but I do think that we should continue to monitor this. And when we get back to this next week, we'll see if these trends continue. Let's jump down to Wan'Dale Robinson emerging as the wide receiver 1 in New York. Is this true? Not quite. So from a route to run the drop back perspective, he is not necessarily the number 1 guy yet. It was Slayton and also Marcus Johnson, who, by the way, DFS sleeper tomorrow. Marcus Johnson, probably not going to happen, but interesting. Wan'Dale Robinson, though, did get a lot of usage, and he also got usage in the red zone. So we did see this with Cole Beasley a little bit. They're not scared to use their interior receivers. Isaiah McKenzie, we've seen it earlier with the Bills. We've also seen it with Cole Beasley. They do have these nice gadget plays for their smaller slot guys in the red zone. We saw it this week with Wan'Dale. He got in the end zone off a red zone target because they used a nice little out route for him. Now, he did only run about 33% of the routes to dropbacks. This is the Richie James syndrome. Richie James, early on the season, was probably the best receiver on the roster based on all the injuries, but the problem was they started using more 2 tight end sets, and he's the slot guy. So from a fantasy perspective, Wan'Dale, of course, is a guy you want to pick up and stash. We are not starting him yet. This is a tough slot matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but it's something we want to continue to monitor because he did see 2 targets in the red zone. But we want to see if he can pass up. I mean, you got David Stills, Slayton, Marcus Johnson. I mean, really, if Wan'Dale can't get on the field in 2 receiver sets, you're going to see a lot of inconsistency. So he is a stash, but not a play for this week based on the fact that he's only running a route on 33% of dropbacks. Let's jump down to the next one. Chris Godwin. Last week, 89% of the snaps. So Chris Godwin is a guy where we faded him early on in drafts because I don't draft guys who are injured. And through the first 6 weeks of the year, it was a good call. But now it's time to flip. It's time to say Chris Godwin is probably one of the top 3 or 4 buys in fantasy football. He's going to start getting healthier and healthier. He's going to start approaching that 80%, 90% range according to his 6 score, his injury update. This is the time to go buy him, though. Like last week, he had a good game, 6 for 95. But he hasn't had that signature blow-up game yet. And he probably won't until the second half of the year. But this week, he gets a very, very good matchup against Carolina. He was one of our starts of the week in the last show. But he's a guy you want to go get now because he's going to get better as he gets healthier. And Tom Brady plus Godwin in the slot equals fantasy gold for your fantasy playoffs. So last week, this is just the key, 93%. The first time all year, he was over 85% snaps. First time all year, he was over 90% route run the dropback, ran 93%. Now, this got the 11th best rest of season slot schedule according to our slot first wide rest of season strength of schedule metric. So 11th best. So he's top half of the league in schedule. He's getting healthier. Go get yourself some Chris Godwin. Throw out an offer to get him on your teams. And join us tomorrow on the Sunday Live show. And we can break down trade offers and stuff like that. We'll do it all live tomorrow if you watch or hear this live. All right, I'm going to take a quick commercial break for one of our key contributors is going to help us break down some buy-sell holds heading into week 7. Be back right after this.
These aren't just any knives. These knives are made from the hardest substance on earth, which is whatever's going on here. Buy Travis Etienne. Buying Travis Etienne is the biggest no-brainer since Razzball launched their premium fantasy football tool subscription for just $5.99 per month.
Razzball's fantasy football tools helped me win $500,000 last year and saved my life. And there's also a free 3-day trial for these best tools in all of fantasy football.
The Jaguars' backfield has been trending from James Robinson to Travis Etienne over the past 3 weeks. Barring an injury, this will still be a timeshare for the rest of the season, but expect Etienne to continue to increase his share while producing RB2 type fantasy numbers with upside. Sell. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Are you tired of starting Rex Burkhead and Chuba Hubbard at running back? Well, boy, do we have a deal for you this week. That's right, we're selling Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 40% off. And if you order in the next hour, we'll throw in 2 more Clyde Edwards-Helaire's absolutely free of charge. You heard that right. Buy 1 Clyde at 40% off. Get 2 more for free. This deal is non-refundable and there's no guarantee of quality. Edwards-Helaire may not even be the second best running back on his own team. Hold. Antonio Gibson. I bought this zucchini pasta maker 6 years ago and haven't used it once. Mrs. Donkey says I should throw it out.
Why would you want pasta made of zucchini? Pasta should be made of pasta.
Not so fast, you absolute smoke show. I've received a very credible tip that a zucchini pasta maker bull market is just about to begin. Antonio Gibson's stock has fallen even faster than zucchini pasta makers. Gibson will be in a timeshare with Brian Robinson moving forward, but he can still be a startable flex option in the coming weeks. Now is not the time to finally listen to Mrs. Donkey and toss him in the trash.
Who wants zucchini noodles? No one. No one has ever said, you know what? I want zucchini noodles.
Thank you, Anime Donkey. We appreciate your support and your great work you're doing over there at Razzball.com. Let's jump down into the next one here, folks. Let's talk about the Colts wide receiver core getting stronger. What does that mean? We're starting to see not only Alex Pierce, who, by the way, had the nice long touchdown last week against Jacksonville, but also Paris Campbell showed up and played with Michael Pittman. We're seeing a lot more in the passing. Now, JT's coming back, and that's going to throw a wrinkle. This team's going to lean more to the run, be more focused on JT than Matt Ryan. But the fact that Matt Ryan is starting to show signs that things are clicking, and this is kind of like things are going to happen. When you have a new quarterback changing teams, it's going to take time for him to get acclimated, and he's starting to get acclimated. He's starting to really look good, and these young receivers for the Colts are looking good. Now, Paris Campbell ran a route on 100% of dropbacks last week. That's up 12% from the previous weeks. Alex Pierce, 71%. That's up 9% from the previous week. But Paris Campbell, they already talked about this. They said that he's starting to look good in practice. Things are clicking. I honestly think that when you start seeing slot versus wide, using the matchup tool, if you use a really good slot matchup for the Colts, Paris Campbell will be a wide receiver 3 in those weeks. However, for this week, week 7, I lean Alex Pierce. So you got the Tennessee Titans, who are an out-wide funnel defense. I do think that the Titans-Colts games are sneaky shootouts sometimes from time to time. So I do think that you're going to see a healthy dose of the Colts receivers in this game. But I lean Alex Pierce behind Michael Pittman, of course, who's an absolute stud. Let's jump down to our tight end updates. Daniel Bellinger, folks, as a Giants fan, I got to say this is a nice seeing our 4th-round rookie doing well, but he's bucking the trend, not only because of the fact he's a rookie, but also a day 3 pick. There's not a lot of hits. There's not a lot of hits in the day 3 for rookie tight ends especially. But this guy is leading the team in routes last week and targets. So he had 5 targets last week, 2 red zone targets, scores in the end zone, but he's leading the team in routes. This is a rookie tight end. This is crazy. The best part is the receiving core just doesn't get it together. We got no Kadarius Toney. We got no Kenny Golladay. They're both out. Again this week, Wan'Dale's still trying to get acclimated. We got Slayton, Marcus Johnson. Daniel Bellinger seems to be the guy that is emerging a little bit. Now, he does have a tough matchup this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars that allow the 23rd most fantasy points to the tight end. So I'm not saying he's not a guy. He's a guy that you need to put on your team if you're struggling at tight end. You need to have him, maybe one other player, and you kind of move around matchups. Like Tonyan's on the rise, a player we'll talk about in a minute. these guys you probably picked up off waivers. Honestly, if you're struggling at tight end, those are the scenarios where it makes sense maybe to have 2 tight ends on your roster. Daniel Bellinger, there's not a lot of tight ends in the NFL that lead the team in routes on a weekly basis. We're talking like Travis Kelce does it from time, Mark Andrews, those kind of players, George Kittle, another guy we'll talk about in a minute. There's very rare occasions where the tight end is leading the team in routes on the week. So I think Daniel Bellinger is definitely someone we want to watch. And if he's on waivers and you need starts periodically, this week he might be, low end tight end one, maybe borderline. But I think overall he's someone that you want in your fantasy teams going down the stretch. Let's jump over to Robert Tonyan, folks. Is Robert Tonyan moving into a must-start tight end territory? Well, he has a season-high 12 targets. I think the key here is that he saw a season-high 63% of his snaps. This is another injury who's going to get stronger in the second half. Now, in the early preseason process, we've talked about players to avoid. Now, Chris Godwin, Robert Tonyan, Robert Woods, all these players because they're coming off serious injuries. But that narrative flips by midseason. Now, if they're looking good in their positions, Robert Tonyan looked great last week on his 12 targets. But here's another key. Randall Cobb went out last week. Why is that important? Robert Tonyan led the team in slot routes. He also saw 50% of his slot snaps overall became in the slot. That's great usage. He's not inline blocking. He's out there running slot routes. And with Randall Cobb out for a little bit, I do think that Robert Tonyan is someone that could really be a borderline tight end one consistently because of his types of usage. He did see his routes run to dropbacks increase by 18%. However, he's got a tough matchup against Washington. Washington's very tough against tight ends and slot receivers. They are an out-wide defense. You want your Allen Lazards, Romeo Doubs in your lineups this week, but it's tough to find tight ends, and I do think Tonyan is moving into that must-start category, even in a tough matchup against the Washington Commanders. All right, last one, folks. George Kittle returning to form. No question mark, just an exclamation point. 12 targets. No, he did not have 12 targets last week. What did George Kittle have? Sorry, folks. Give me 1 second. I need to check something. 10 targets last week. My apologies. God, Bob, you got to update these things. 10 targets last week. Season high, 98% of the snaps. Saw his routes run the dropbacks increased by 8%, but he led the team in routes and slot routes. That's huge. So for a while, not out there, he was out there blocking, not running as many routes as you would like to see. Last week, they get into a pretty nice game flow going down to the Atlanta Falcons. They end up losing the game by 2 touchdowns. They have to throw a little bit more, but he's out there running slot routes. His health is improving, but I love the fact that he's out there he had 6 targets last week from the slot. He had 2 targets in the 3 previous games. That's going to be huge for George Kittle. George Kittle is a difference-making tight end. Last week's performance, 8 for 83. If you're in half PPR, solid, but you're not looking at that matchup and he's not attainable. If you need a tight end in your league, might not be a bad idea to put out a feeler for a guy because most of the teams who have George Kittle probably have another tight end on the roster because of his injuries and his slower start this season. So honestly, George Kittle might be someone to buy in fantasy. He has a great matchup, solid matchup against Kansas City. The Chiefs are going to put up points against a very, very bad, very, very banged up San Francisco defense. So, yeah, I think that's it, man. I think for now, I'm going to say that's all the updates we have for today's show. If you're on here watching right now and asking questions, please come back tomorrow. We are going to be on for 3 hours, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. PST. That's 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern, answering Star Sit questions. Me and a whole team. So you don't even just get one opinion. You're going to get 3 opinions tomorrow as I'll be joined by a couple of my Razzball teammates. And we're going to be doing all your Star Sit questions. So Cedric, I see your question. I love the question. Honestly, you're probably going to be sitting CMC. I don't care. I know people are going to tell me you got to play him. I just don't trust it. Guy just got there on Friday. I don't imagine him being really enough. But you got those questions. Come back tomorrow. You have different opinions. There's going to be people that tell you need to start CMC. I'm personally, if you have elite guys like Stevenson and Walker, then it's okay to sit CMC in that scenario. But Joe Villa, I see Joe Villa. I see him, man. Makes a good point to the Jets who are shutting down wide receivers. I honestly think I disagree. I think the fact that Cobb was out allowed him to change his role a little bit, get more slot routes, be out there on the outside, see more targets. But I do agree that matchups do matter. If they're shutting down wide receivers and they're bad against tight ends, yeah, you're right. It might make some sense there. But I do think that Cobb being out made some sense. We're also seeing the increases in an underlying snap percentage. Seeing a season high 63% of snaps, seeing his routes run the dropbacks increase by 18%, also factor. But all angles need to be covered, Joe Villa, and I do appreciate that. But join us tomorrow, folks. We're going to answer all your start sit questions. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby Lamarco. Make sure you're following us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And, of course, make sure you're going to razzball.com. Go check out our brand new tools, folks. The Fantasy Data tab is fantastic. Slot versus wide analysis, slot versus wide fantasy points scored, slot versus wide rest of season. We got it all. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby Lamarco. Thank you for joining once again. We are out of here.